My name is Glen Morrow, and I gave Harwick Medical Devices 15 years of my life before they gave me 22 minutes on a Zoom call to take it all back. The meeting invite landed in my inbox at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning. No subject line, just a calendar link and two participants, me and an HR coordinator named Barb, who I'd only ever seen in company all-hands photos. I stared at it long enough that my coffee went cold. Something in my stomach already knew. She had her camera off when she joined. I remember thinking that was strange. We had a company policy about cameras during one-on-ones. I could see my own face in the small preview box in the corner of the screen, looking exactly the way you'd expect a 51-year-old man to look when he's about to have the floor pulled out from under him. "Glenn," she said, reading from something I couldn't see. "After a thorough review of our operational structure, Harwick Medical Devices has made the difficult decision to eliminate your position effective immediately. Your access credentials will be deactivated at the conclusion of this call. Please arrange to return any company property to the Grand Rapids office by end of week." 22 minutes. That's how long the whole thing took, including the part where I sat in silence long enough that she asked if I was still there. 15 years. 15 years of showing up before anyone else arrived, staying after the cleaning crew had gone home, flying to trade shows in Cincinnati and Minneapolis on my own dime because the travel budget was already exhausted. 15 years of building a product line that surgeons trusted enough to put inside people's bodies. I closed my laptop and sat at my kitchen table on Birchwood Drive in Grand Rapids, Michigan, listening to the refrigerator hum. Let me back up, because there are things you need to understand about Harwick before this story makes any sense. I grew up in Flint. My father worked at the Buick City plant for 32 years, actually inside the building, on the line, not managing it from an office. My mother ran the register at a grocery store on Clio Road until her knees gave out. We were not poor in the way people mean when they say poor to sound dramatic. We were practical. We kept our shoes until the soles separated. We didn't take vacations. We visited relatives and called it one. I didn't have the grades for an engineering program straight out of high school, and I didn't have the money either. What I had was a community college in Flint that offered a 2-year machining and manufacturing technology program, and a professor there who told me in my second semester that I had a mind for tolerances, meaning I understood instinctively that the difference between a part that works and a part that kills somebody is often measured in thousandths of an inch. I worked my way up. I transferred to Ferris State. I got my bachelor's in manufacturing engineering by going to school at night while working days at a small tool and die shop in Pontiac. It took me 6 years to finish a 4-year degree, and I was proud of every single one of those years. By the time I joined Harwick Medical Devices in my mid-30s, I'd spent a decade in precision manufacturing. Harwick made orthopedic implants, hip components, knee systems, the titanium and cobalt chrome parts that get cemented into people after their joints wear out. The work mattered in a specific way I'd never felt making automotive components. Someone was walking around on something I'd helped build. The problem with orthopedic implants in those days was consistency. A hip cup could come out of the casting process 0.2 of a millimeter out of spec, and surgeons would never know until years later when the patient came back in with pain nobody could explain. I spent 2 years developing a new approach to precision investment casting that reduced dimensional variance by 63% across our entire femoral stem line. That number doesn't mean much unless you've worked in the industry, so I'll translate it. Fewer revision surgeries, fewer patients in pain, and a rejection rate that dropped so low our quality control team had to find something else to worry about. That process was Harwick. By the time they fired me, it had been running for 13 years and generated what their own investor presentations described as the core of their competitive advantage. Now let me tell you about my boss. His name was Royce Hemmings, and he had been CEO of Harwick Medical Devices for 4 years when he let HR fire me by Zoom call. Royce had an MBA from Vanderbilt, a Lexus LS that he drove 60 miles round trip from his house in Ada Township, and the particular confidence that comes from never having worked a job where the outcome was physically real. He'd come to Harwick from a healthcare consulting firm in Nashville, and before that, he'd been at a private equity-backed wound care company that had since been dissolved. He was 53, looked 48, and wore a Patagonia vest to every internal meeting as if it communicated something about his values. His idea of understanding our manufacturing process was scheduling a quarterly plant walk where he'd tour the floor with a clipboard, ask questions that our production supervisor answered patiently, and then write a memo that repackaged everything he'd been told as his own insights. I watched him do this 4 times. The 3rd time, he asked our metallurgist why we didn't just use a cheaper alloy, and was genuinely surprised when she spent 15 minutes explaining implant biocompatibility requirements. He once told the board, in a presentation I was asked to help prepare, that our precision casting methodology represented a proprietary advantage unique to the Harwick platform. He used my numbers, my process data, my quality metrics. Somewhere in the background of the slide, showing those numbers was my name, in a font about half the size of his initials on the title page. The warning signs had been accumulating like snow in late February. Not alarming at first, and then suddenly impossible to ignore. My direct reports started getting pulled into meetings I wasn't invited to. The timeline on our next product certification had quietly shifted from a chart I maintained to one maintained by a consultant Royce had brought in from Chicago. And then there was the head of our sales team who had stopped making eye contact with me in the parking lot 3 weeks before the Zoom call. I was too busy finishing a tolerance analysis on our new tibial component to pay close attention. That's the honest truth. I thought I was indispensable. I thought being indispensable mattered. The financial pressure in our house had been real for a couple of years. My wife and I had a mortgage of $285,000 on our place on Birchwood Drive, which was a good house in a good neighborhood, but not a house that could survive long without my income. Our son was 17 and starting to talk about college the way teenagers do when they've done enough research to be specific. He'd mentioned Michigan engineering twice in 1 week. Our daughter was 14 and had been taking piano seriously enough that her teacher had started using the word conservatory. My wife taught 3rd grade at a school in Kentwood, which she loved and which paid her accordingly. I hadn't told her how worried I was. She'd had a stressful year. Her mother had been in and out of the hospital with cardiac issues, and we'd spent more time than I expected covering costs that insurance declined. I kept telling myself I'd have something concrete to say when I had something concrete to say. The week after the Zoom call, I was in the garage trying to organize what I was going to do next. I pulled an old storage bin off a shelf, one that had survived 3 moves and still had a strip of blue painter's tape on the lid with the words, "Work Docs," all written in my handwriting from maybe 12 years back. Inside was a hanging file folder with a label I'd typed and printed on our inkjet printer, back when we still had an inkjet printer. Patent filing 2008. I sat down on the concrete floor of my garage and read everything in that folder. In 2007, I had been working on the precision casting process for about 8 months when an intellectual property attorney named Faye Coulter came to give a lunch presentation to the engineering team at Harwick. She was based in Detroit and specialized in manufacturing patents. She said something during that presentation that stayed with me. If you've invented a process and your employer hasn't required you to assign it, it may be yours. Check your employment agreement. Check it carefully. I checked mine that evening. My 2005 employment contract with Harwick had been written when the company was a 15-person operation running out of a leased building in Wyoming, Michigan. It said nothing about patent assignment. It didn't mention intellectual property at all. I went back to Faye Coulter. We spent 3 months documenting everything, my original notebooks, the test data, the dates. I paid $12,000 from our savings, which my wife knew about because she has always known everything about our finances. She agreed with me. She understood that protecting your work meant something, even when you couldn't fully see yet what it would mean. The patent was granted in September 2009. Method for controlled dimensional consistency in investment cast orthopedic load-bearing components. Patent number US 8,312,741, filed under my name alone, mine. I had genuinely forgotten about it. Not the way you forget where you put your keys, more the way you forget about a fire extinguisher you mounted on the wall years ago. You know it's there. You stop seeing it. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the USPTO patent database on my laptop at the kitchen table. Still active, 17 years remaining. Then I cross-referenced it with Harwick's FDA device submissions, which are public documents. Every 510K clearance they'd filed since 2011 for any product using my casting process listed that process as a core manufacturing method. Their investor materials from the last 3 years, also public, described precision casting consistency as the single differentiating factor in their premium implant line. According to those same investor materials, the premium line represented 79% of Harwick's revenue. I stared at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Faye Coulter. She picked up on the second ring, even though it was a Thursday evening. "Glen Morrow," she said. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." She already knew about the acquisition. Everyone in the medical device industry in Michigan knew about it. Baldner GmbH, a German orthopedics conglomerate, had announced a letter of intent to acquire Harwick for $380 million. The deal was expected to close before the end of the year. Baldner was known for conducting exhaustive intellectual property audits before any acquisition closed. It was practically a signature of their M&A process. "Here's what you need to understand," Faye said. "Harwick has been using your patented process for 13 years without a licensing agreement. Their legal department almost certainly assumed it was company property. They were wrong, and there is no gray area here." I asked her what happened when Baldner found it during due diligence. She was quiet for a moment. "Their legal team will halt the process immediately. No board authorizes a $380 million acquisition of a company that doesn't own its core technology. The deal dies, or they renegotiate from the ground up." I thought about Royce Hemmings and his Patagonia vest and his plant walk clipboard. I thought about the 22-minute Zoom call and the HR coordinator with her camera off. "Let them find it in the audit," I told Faye. She went quiet for a slightly different kind of quiet. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I want to be honest about those 2 weeks of waiting. They were not comfortable. I woke up at 3 in the morning more than once and lay there in the dark running the numbers. My wife knew everything by that point. I'd told her the night I talked to Faye, and she had been quiet for a long time before she said, "You built that process, you paid for that patent, you have every right." She was right. That didn't make the waiting easy. My son asked me once during that stretch why I seemed different. I told him I was working through something and that it would make sense later. He nodded the way 17-year-olds do when they've decided to trust you. The call came on a Monday afternoon. I was in the backyard stacking firewood when my phone showed a Grand Rapids number I didn't recognize. "Glen." The voice belonged to Royce Hemmings, and I could hear something in it I had never heard there before, the absence of composure. "I need to talk to you, right now." I set a log down carefully. "Hello, Royce. You know why I'm calling. Why don't you tell me?" Baldner's legal team flagged a patent during their IP audit, registered to a Glen Morrow. He read the number from something. "That's your patent." I didn't say anything. "Glen, I'm going to be direct with you. This deal is $380 million. There are 112 people at this company. This patent issue. It's not an issue, Royce, it's a fact. We can work something out. We can retroactively structure a licensing arrangement, make this whole thing. What you're describing is backdating a contract. That's fraud." I kept my voice very even. I'd recommend not finishing that sentence. He was quiet. I had never in 4 years heard Royce Hemmings be quiet without choosing it. This was different. "What do you want?" he finally said. "I want you to understand what happened here. You fired me by Zoom call after 15 years. Your HR person had her camera off. You couldn't manage a phone call or a face-to-face conversation because I was worth 22 minutes of HR time to you and nothing else. That's what I want you to sit with. I'm not asking about the termination right now. I'm asking what you want to fix this. I know what you're asking, and I'm telling you I'm not going to fix it for you." I hung up. My phone rang 47 times over the next 4 days. I counted. Royce called 3 more times. Harwick's general counsel called twice. A partner from a law firm in Detroit, whose name I recognized from industry publications, left a voicemail that began with, "Mr. Morrow, this is a time-sensitive matter of significant mutual interest." Baldner's American legal representative called, and was notably more professional than everyone else, which told me something about where the real leverage sat. I returned none of the calls until Faye told me to. Baldner's legal team has confirmed the patent is valid, and that Harwick has been using it without authorization since 2011, she said. They've suspended the acquisition process. Their general counsel wants to open a direct conversation with you, not through Harwick. What's their posture? Professional. They want to understand whether there's a path to acquiring clean IP. That means buying a license from you, either directly or as a condition of the acquisition. I told her I'd talk to Baldner directly. I would not talk to Royce Hemmings again. Royce showed up at my house on a Saturday morning. I'm not going to pretend this part wasn't strange. He'd driven across town in his Lexus and was standing on my front porch in a fleece pullover, which was the most casual I'd ever seen him dress. He looked, honestly, like a man who hadn't been sleeping. My wife answered the door and came to find me in the kitchen. "Your old boss is on the porch," she said, with a particular flatness that communicated exactly what she thought of that. I went out and closed the front door behind me. "Glenn." He put his hand out. I looked at it. After a moment, he let it drop. "The board is meeting Wednesday. I need to bring them something." "What kind of something?" "An indication that you're willing to negotiate." "Anything. A licensing framework, a letter of intent, a conversation, something that shows this can be resolved before the deal collapses entirely." I looked at him standing on my porch. 4 years of him taking credit for a plant that other people had built. 4 years of plant walk clipboards and consultant memos and vests that cost more than my first car. I thought about the meeting invite with no subject line, the camera that was off. "Royce, here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to license this patent at fair market rates to anyone who wants to use it, including Harwick, including Baldner, including every orthopedic manufacturer who wants to run a cleaner process. Standard terms, non-exclusive. That's what I was going to do eventually anyway. What I'm not going to do is hand you a solution before Wednesday so you can walk into that board meeting and explain this away." He stared at me. The deal could die. "Yes," I said, "it could. And you're okay with that." "I'm okay with companies understanding that the people who actually build things matter. I'm okay with that being a lesson that costs something." He drove away. I went back inside and helped my wife make breakfast. The acquisition collapse ran in Crane's Grand Rapids business on a Thursday. Harwick stock dropped 38% in after-hours trading. Baldner issued a brief statement about unresolved due diligence concerns. Royce Hemmings issued a statement about navigating a complex intellectual property landscape. The board voted to remove him as CEO on Friday morning. Faye called me before I'd read it anywhere. "The interim CEO wants to talk," she said. "His name is Murray Strand. He was the COO. Started as a process engineer, went into operations, has been with the company 11 years. "I know Murray," I said. "He's a good engineer." "He sounds it. He didn't ask me to fix anything. He just asked if you'd be willing to have a conversation." Murray called me himself, not through a lawyer. We talked for 40 minutes. He told me he'd reviewed everything. My personnel file, my patent documentation, the process integration history going back to 2009. He said the words "this was wrong" without anyone making him say them. He offered $85 million for a non-exclusive perpetual license to the patent, plus a separate settlement for 13 years of unauthorized use. I held the phone away from my face for a moment and looked at the ceiling of my home office. $85 million. Faye had warned me the number would be significant. Hearing it was still something else. Within 5 weeks, I had licensing inquiries from 3 other major orthopedic manufacturers. The patent covered a broad enough process that anyone doing serious precision casting for load-bearing implants had reason to want it. Faye structured non-exclusive licensing agreements with each of them over the following 4 months. I paid off our mortgage on a Tuesday. My wife sat at the kitchen table and read the payoff confirmation twice before she looked up. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said she wanted to take our son to see Michigan Engineering's campus. "For real this time," she said. "Not just a drive-by." I told her we could go whenever she wanted. Our daughter's conservatory application went out that fall with a real budget behind it. Royce Hemmings landed at a healthcare consulting firm in Nashville 8 months after leaving Harwick. A smaller firm, closer to what he'd been doing before he ever became a CEO. I heard about it through someone at a Grand Rapids industry dinner. I don't wish him anything. I genuinely don't. He taught me something I needed to know, and the lesson just happened to cost him everything it should have. Murray Strand stabilized Harwick. The company eventually attracted a different acquirer, a domestic medical device group out of Indianapolis that did thorough due diligence and knew exactly what they were buying, including the licensing costs for my process, which were now a fixed line item in every acquisition discussion. Murray called me before that deal closed, not because he needed anything, but because he thought I'd want to know. I started a consulting practice 6 months after the settlement, mostly helping mid-size manufacturers understand their intellectual property situations before those situations became emergencies. Faye joined me as a partner. We work out of a renovated building in downtown Grand Rapids, 2 blocks from the river, which is a nicer view than I ever had at Harwick. My first client was a materials engineer from Saginaw who had developed an adhesive bonding process used in EV batteries assembly and had never once considered that it might belong to her rather than her employer. It took us 3 hours to explain the situation and another month to get the paperwork sorted. Always document what you create, I told her at the end of our first meeting. Date your notebooks, back up everything, and read your employment agreement like it's a contract, because it is. She looked at me, like she was trying to figure out whether I was being dramatic. I wasn't. There's a version of this story where I never open that storage bin in the garage, where I throw the folder labeled Patent Filing 2008 out with the outdated user manuals and the old project binders, where Baldner's audit finds nothing, Royce Hemmings's merger closes for $380 million, and I spend 2 years applying for jobs while the technology I invented keeps generating money for people who treated me like overhead. I think about that version sometimes, not with regret, more with something like clarity. What I know now that I didn't know at 51 is that the real cost of giving everything to an institution that doesn't see you is not the lost hours or the missed dinners or even the job. The real cost is the part where you start to believe that what they think of you is true, that you are replaceable, that the work can be separated from the person who built it. The patent says otherwise. The USPTO doesn't make exceptions for org charts or executive titles or Vanderbilt MBA programs. It asks one question: who invented this? And whoever invented it owns it until they decide that they don't. My son starts at Michigan Engineering in the fall. Our daughter was accepted to a pre-conservatory summer program in Ann Arbor that she has been preparing for with a focus I find genuinely impressive. I coach a youth robotics team on Saturday mornings at a community center in Grand Rapids. Mostly middle school kids from the east side, some of them in circumstances I recognize from my own. I tell them what my professor told me 30 years ago in a community college classroom in Flint. Understand the tolerances, document your work, and never let anyone convince you that what you build doesn't belong to you. If you're out there grinding away and giving your best work to an institution that barely knows your name, I want you to hear this. Document everything. Save your notebooks. Read your employment contract. File the paperwork. Because the day they decide you're unnecessary, everything you documented is still yours. They gave me 22 minutes to be let go. It took them one patent to understand what they'd actually done.